All right, welcome everybody. We're going to get started a couple minutes early because folks are already here, which is kind of fun to see people excited to chat. My name is Kira. My business is Kira K Designs, and I am a knitting and crochet pattern designer as well as a teacher. And I will be teaching at Stitches Expo at home this week. I have a class on gauge and blocking later today, which actually has some space and has no homework and no materials list. So if you're free later this afternoon, it's still possible to pop in. And then today I am here, well, right now I'm here as a vendor. I sell knitting and crochet patterns and kits, and I want to talk today about some tips for playing with color, partially because that's something that I've had to actively work on. If you take a look at my wardrobe, it is mostly solid colors and a whole lot of neutrals, but it gives me a lot of joy to work with color in my knitting and crochet. So it's something that I've been kind of actively working on for the last 20 years or so with a couple missteps along the way. Once I made a yellow sweater because I thought I should, and I wore it once and gave it to a friend who loves it. So it worked out in the end. But color can be kind of scary for people. My background, in case it's helpful to know, is in theater and specifically in costume design. So that's where I learned some things about color, also just by trial and error. I used to work in a yarn shop, and I would spend a lot of the day helping people put things together and figure out what worked and didn't work. And then as a designer, I often work with indie dyers who put together color packs, and often those will inspire design. So I'll be given the parameters of these are the colors, this is the amount of yarn, make something interesting. And I kind of like that because it gives me a lot of freedom, but still a little bit of a container to put it into. So welcome folks who are coming in new. I'm going to go ahead and just mute you, but you have the power to unmute yourself. So if you have a question, feel free. We are being recorded. So if you ask your question vocally, you'll be recorded. But we also have the chat open if you would rather type a question in there. I will keep an eye on that as well. So first of all, chatting about color, I'm going to talk about the sweater I'm wearing because people are probably already a little bit curious about it. So this is called the Spoke cardigan, and I'll put that into the chat as well as just a basic website URL. It's one of my patterns, and it is available in 14 different sizes, partially because I like this as a close fit. You don't have to do it as a close fit, but if you want to, it's really got to be the right size for you. So I've got a wide size range. It's done top down seamlessly. And I've done lots of versions of this. So I have one that I show it in a variegated yarn, one that I'm showing it in a solid color yarn, and then I have this really fun one with stripes. Hi, welcome everyone who's new popping in. We are being recorded, so if you don't want to be on the recording, you might want to turn your camera off. You're welcome to unmute if you have a question, or I have the chat open as well. So I was starting out just talking about this sweater that I'm wearing, which is a really fun one for playing with color. It is done in stripes. Sorry, just let me do a little housekeeping here and spotlight myself just to make sure that works for the video. So this is a sweater, it's done top down seamlessly. And this particular version of it, I combined a solid color with a striping yarn. This is Sincere Sheep Cormo Sport for my main color. And then the stripes is from Yarn Hero, and it's done in a way a lot like a hand spun yarn, where the fiber is dyed and then it's spun and then it's plied. So you get this ever-changing progression of color that's really fun. And a whole sweater out of this yarn might have felt like a lot to me. So I toned it down a little bit and let the stripiness of the yarn really shine by pairing it with a more neutral, solid color. So that is definitely one way that you can get yourself into working with more color. If you're a little nervous, pair it with a neutral, and wear it with neutrals too, so that you can let it be colorful, but still tone it down a little bit and fit into your particular wardrobe. I brought another sweater too. I'm mostly going to be showing accessories today because that's what I have kits for. But I know a lot of you are probably sweater knitters, so it's fun to show some sweaters as well. This is another one that I really love, where I used a gradient yarn. And this is a naturally dyed gradient. It's Sincere Sheep again, a Cormo fingering. And so I let the sweater be pretty simple. This is called the Essential Cropped Cardi, and it is another short one, but I do have a longer version called the Essential Cardigan, which has long sleeves and a longer body. And that one I've seen really fun versions where people do a gradient just in the yoke and go with a coordinating solid for the bottom of the sleeves and the body. And I really love gradients. Let's talk about gradients for a while because I think they're a nice gateway into playing with color because it's one yarn. You don't have to have a lot of yarn tails to work with. And I find that they keep me more interested because as I am knitting or crocheting with a gradient, it keeps changing. So even if what I'm doing for my work is a little bit repetitive, maybe it's a simple stitch pattern or a motif that gets repeated, it keeps always changing. So I find myself excited to get to the next color. And then I want to get to the next color. So I'm more excited through the project. And I also get it done faster because I just want to pick it up all the time and have trouble putting it down. So welcome everyone who's new. I'm seeing lots of folks popping in. My name is Kira, Kira K Designs. My website is kirakdesigns.com, which makes it easy. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook and Ravelry. And everywhere I am there as Kira K Designs. And I'm lucky that I have an unusual enough first name that you can find me if you just Google Kira knitting or crochet. So we're talking about color. I'm going to start talking about some gradient yarns. I've already talked about my sweater for anyone who missed it. This is being recorded so you can catch up. So this is a really fun little shawlette that's done with a gradient yarn. It's done with a little cake of color, and I've got one right here in a different color so you can see what it looks like, also just in the packaging for the kits I use. And a great tip for gradients, this is called the Stratiform shawl, by the way. A great tip for gradients is think about if you want to start from the center or if you want to start from the outside. Some companies even will pack up the exact same color and wind it opposite way so that you can sort of see. What happens, there's a little bit of a visual trick. So even though on this, we have the exact same amount of the blue and the purple and the pink, you see a lot more of the pink because I started with it. Because at the beginning of a top-down project like this, you've got shorter rows or rounds, you get more rows or rounds of that color. So you end up seeing a bigger chunk of the pink, even though there's the same amount of the other colors on here. So you can always think about when you're starting with a gradient. Generally, I like to work from the inside of a yarn cake because it doesn't roll around on me. But if you get a gradient and you really want to start with the outside color, you can just do that. Or you could always rewind it so that what was on the outside is on the inside and you still get the ease of the knitting or crochet. I also just want to point out in here, this particular one has some beads that are done at the hem. And so the kit has the beads and also the beading needle that you need to put the beads on the yarn when it's time, as well as the pattern and the yarn. I try to make it easy so that you have pretty much everything you need. I don't include knitting needles or crochet hooks or stitch markers in my kits because you probably already have those and they definitely raise the price. But for things that you are unlikely to have handy or be able to just grab even at your local yarn shop like the beads, I do tend to put them in there. All right, welcome folks who are new. I'm just muting you as you come in. If you want to talk, you can, but you will be recorded, which isn't that big of a deal. Oops, oh, sorry, Lisa, I think I might have just asked you to unmute. You could ignore that. I was trying to mute you and I think you did it at the same time. So talking a little bit more about gradient yarns, I've got a couple other examples. And again, a gradient is a nice way to play with color without having a lot of yarn tails to weave in. And I've got a question here to take the shawl off. Yeah, absolutely. So this is the Stratiform shawl. It is, if you lay it flat, it's like a 3/4 circle, which is a shape I really like because it stays on your shoulders really nicely, even if you're moving around. So this one, you start at the top. And again, I would start with your favorite color because you'll visually see more of that. And it's bands of knitted stockinette and a simple lace pattern and a little bit of garter stitch in between. And let me see if I can get the beads to show up. Sorry, the lighting gets a little funny. I have to find like the right spot for everything. Yeah, it's a little subtle, but you can see here I've got like a darker blue bead that's on the bottom. And that's another choice when you're picking which end of your gradient to start with. The beads would pop a little bit more if you had the pink at the bottom, but you would end up having something that looked a lot more like a blue shawl based on the color that you start with. The sweater I'm wearing is called the Spoke Cardigan, S-P-O-K-E, like the spokes on a bicycle, and is a top-down seamless sweater that I did this particular one striping a solid and then a self-striping, almost hand-spun looking yarn that was dyed as fiber and then plied together. So another one that I have in kits showing the gradient yarn, this one's crochet. I always make sure to have some crochet to show as well as knitting. This is called the Ice Crystals Capelet, and it's another one that's almost a 3/4 circle when you lay it flat, which again is just a really nice shape because it comes over your shoulders, and there's enough here that you could pin it. And I've got kind of a small frame. If you're larger than me, it will still come pin around. It would just be a little bit shorter. And there is a larger size as well. And all of my shawls, I tend to have a sample my size, but there always are larger size as well. So this one again, with a gradient, pick the color you like most to start with because you do visually see more of that. And then it just keeps you interested, keeps me interested at least as I'm working through. And this guy I've got in lots of different colors. This is a yarn from Freya Fibers. So you can see this is a bit of a more neutral one. I got rainbows. I got a little bit of everything available in this. As a designer doing kits, I like to pick some of my colors and see if the yarn dyers will pick some as well, so I can make sure to get a nice variety. Another one that I've got in Crochet with a gradient yarn, which is actually a really great introduction to lace if you're a little nervous because it's a very simple shape. This is called the Terraced Vineyard Wrap, and it is long rows, just doing a nice big long rectangle. There is a scarf size as well on here, the pattern. And the gradient for me really kept me interested as I was working on this because it was ever changing. And I have some that are a little bit more exciting color too. Like this one is called Hard Candy, kind of a nice vibrant rainbow. I also love a gradient in something with motifs. So this is called the Sea Star Shawl. And it is a crocheted shawl. The shape, it's similar to a Faroese shawl if you've seen those, where it's almost like a straight section in the back and it's truncated. It doesn't come to a point. Although one of my testers really wanted a point, so she added in 3 more stars at the very bottom. And this one, you just start at one end of the gradient and you gradually work through all the different colors as you're going across. And the pattern for this one, it's got 2 sizes. This is the smaller size. And I have a map, as it were, in the pattern. So it shows you the order in which to connect the different motifs. They're connected as you go, so you don't have a lot of finishing to do at the end. And it walks you through that. If you're using a solid color, you can just make the motifs and join them in whatever order. But if you like the sort of going from one gradient to the other across the width of the shawl, the map is super helpful. And welcome to anybody who's new. My name is Kira. My business is Kira K Designs. And I will put my website into the chat one more time. It's kirakdesigns.com, which makes it pretty easy to find me. All of my patterns are available just as patterns. And then I also have some that come in kits. So most of what I'm showing today, other than the sweater I'm wearing, are available in kits too. So that you can get the yarn already picked out for you. And that is actually a great way if you're nervous about working with color. Getting yarn packs that have all the colors in there is a nice way to not feel like you have to go into a store and find 10 different colors that are going to work out well together, or 2 or 3 or whatever it happens to be. So I've got 2 more things I'm going to show you with gradients, and I'm going to get into some samples that have multiple colors in one piece. So this one is rather large. It's called the Overlay Cowl, and it is a really big loop. You can wear it as a big loop. I tend to wear it doubled. You could even triple it if you want to. And this one has a gradient yarn for the background. It's a Small Farm alpaca yarn, and it's dyed by one of the alpaca farmers right in the ranch kitchen. That's actually a really fun place to visit. If anyone is in California like I am, I do trips there, and we'll be starting that up again, probably in the fall. So this is a background color that's a really big gradient cake. And then I have here a solid color that is creating the contrast here. This is called the Overlay Cowl. It's not technically overlaid, it really looks like that, but you are working it at once, done with a slip stitch. And slip stitch is one of my favorite ways to work with color because you only have to carry 1 strand at a time. Stranded color work is great. A lot of people are nervous about it. And also, it's just a little bit more work in terms of the tension. You've got to pay a bit more attention. Whereas the slip stitch, you only work with 1 color at a time. So you're basically making stripes. And then sometimes you are moving up a color. By slipping the stitch, it draws up the previous color. So you get a lot of impact, but it's not a whole lot of extra work. And this one, again, with all of this color changing, it's a big piece. I might have gotten bored if I was doing a solid, but by having the color change, it keeps me interested and excited to move on to the next one. So that is called the Overlay Cowl. If you look on my website, I also have samples of this where I worked with scrap yarns and mini skeins as my background. So I kind of built my own color changing yarn, working with things that I had lying around the house, basically. I have a lot of yarn lying around my house. You may or may not have a whole lot, but all those little bits and bobs that are left over, mini skeins that you just get one of, or maybe it's a party favor from an event, and you don't necessarily have a plan. All right, so I've got just a couple more gradients, and these last ones are gradients that are not dyed as a gradient cake, but are a set of minis. So this particular one, this is a version of it where it's got 5 different mini skeins, and then you'd work through them one at a time as you work on the project. So this is a knitted pattern. It's called the Swerve Shawl, and it's a big kind of curved triangle. There's no straight edges on it. Just like with the gradients, start with the color you like the most because you will see more of it visually, even though it's the same area, because it's narrower, it becomes longer and you end up thinking that you kind of see more of that, even though technically it's the same amount, but it's a little visual trick for you. So this goes through the 5 different mini skeins. It's a super easy pattern. I designed this a while ago when I was teaching at a retreat, and I needed to have a pattern to give everybody, but I wanted to keep it really simple. So I usually wear it like this, kind of bunched up and a little asymmetric, but it also works if you want to wrap it over your shoulders or put a pin on it. So that's a fun one, using a gradient in the form of mini skeins. I've got one more of those, which is a crochet pattern. This is called the transition shawl. And this one, you start at the top and head downwards. And this particular one, unlike the traditional gradients, sorry, I've got a squeaky floor. I hope that isn't too noticeable on the audio. This one I've actually put up the kit so you have less of the top 2 colors, so you do get the same length of them, and visually it looks like the same amount, even though it's quite a bit less of the black here because it's got the shorter rows. And this one is a pretty simple double crochet, and then I've got this lovely lace edging. And like most of my patterns for crochet, both the beginning and the edging are shown in a stitch diagram as well as written out. All right, so that's gradients. I've got something, a bit of a transition here that is a gradient with the mini skein. And we're going to talk about combining multiple colors next. Now, this is something I had to train my eye to do, so it might be useful for you to know sort of what went wrong for me at the beginning. When I first started working with multiple colors at a time, and I was a little reticent to do that, both just because my personal aesthetic and not feeling confident to do it, sometimes I pick colors that were too close. And I realized that's because in my mind, when I pick up 2 skeins of yarn, I'm thinking them almost as like I would wear a top in this color and a skirt or pants in that color. So 2 big chunks next to each other. And you can certainly knit or crochet like that with color blocking, where you just do half of something else. But generally we're mixing them a little bit more. So you want to think about how they would look blended more. And it could even be that you sort of narrow your frame. So you're looking at a smaller amount, like literally just look through your hands like this. So you aren't seeing 2 whole skeins of yarn, but you're seeing 2 little stripes of them. Can be helpful if you're thinking of stripes. If you already own the yarn, if you're not at the yarn shop, but if you're shopping your stash, you can take a little piece of cardboard and kind of wrap some strands around it to get the idea of stripes and see if you like it. You can also swatch just to see how it looks. Check your stitch pattern, check your gauge, but also see if you like the colors together. One thing that I found really helpful is to keep in mind a stronger difference of color and also adding in a difference in value, which is lightness and darkness. If you have 2 colors that are close in hue, which is the actual color we talk about, and they're close in value, then you're going to end up not really seeing the difference a whole lot. So for example, if you're going to stripe a medium gray and a medium blue, you're not really going to get a whole lot of output for that. So you would rather go with a light gray and a dark blue. As an example, I've actually got one right here. So here, I've got a really nice light gray and a dark blue, and you really see these stripes from across the room. So it's worth the extra effort of putting them in. And this is a fun one. This is called the amplitude scarf, where you're working the long way. And I ended up loving the stripes so much that I continued them down into the fringe with these kind of big tassel kind of style fringes at the very bottom. Stripes can be a great way to get into playing with color work. Adding a contrast edging is really nice as well. I also like doing just a little bit of intarsia. Intarsia, if you haven't heard of it or done it recently, it's also called picture knitting. And it's when we work with multiple colors in sort of big blobs of color. So not stranded color work where it's mixed across the row, or slip stitch where we often mix across the row, but it's kind of sections of color. So if you think of like a sweater that's got big floral pattern on it, those are pretty popular in the early 90s in the knitting world, that would be intarsia. That style has a lot of yarn tails to weave in. I prefer doing just a little bit of intarsia. And that's where I came up with this. This is a shawl that I'll show you the shawl in a moment. It's called the Verge shawl. And I named it that because you can see here these stripes come to the verge of the end of the row, but they don't make it all the way. You could get a similar effect with short rows if the rows turn back at that point. But what I did instead is intarsia. So you can see right here at the transition, that row does continue. You just change to a different color. It's not hard to do. Intarsia is something else that people tend to get worried about. They've heard it's difficult and then they just avoid ever trying it. And this one's nice because it's just a little bit of intarsia. You know, every so often you do just a few rows and then you're done with it. And I want to show you a bigger version of that, which has, so that one was a gradient yarn, pretty subtle gradient with a solid for the stripes. And this one is a semi-solid yarn with a whole rainbow of mini skeins for the stripes. And this again, it's big enough to wear over your shoulders. If you really like to be cozy and warm, you can absolutely put it on backwards, or the smaller one works even better for that. And this one, when I do kits for it, there is the solid color and then all the mini skeins. So this particular one has a main color that is solid, some of them are variegated, and has stripes for all of the mini skeins. So that one can be really fun to work with as well. If anyone has questions, I've got the chat open. I'm just gonna pop my website in there one more time for folks who are new in case you wanna go look and browse. I've got knitting and crochet patterns, and also for a lot of them, especially ones I'm holding up, I've got kits, which have the pattern and the yarn. And if you are new to working with various colors in one project, or you are a little nervous, or you tried it and it did not work out, the kits are really nice because it's been planned for you, and you can kind of see how it goes. So Ronnie, some of my patterns, or some of my kits rather, have yarn that is ready to go. So like this is in a cake, you're ready to work with it. The ones that aren't skeins, I don't generally, but you can send me an email and we could probably work something out. I'm not a yarn shop, I'm just a designer, so I don't have a motorized skein winder that makes it super duper fast. But you know, if it'll make you actually able to start the project, we can talk about it. So that one again is called the Verge Shawl. And I've got kits both for the big one with the 2 big skeins and a set of minis. And I also have kits for the smaller one I showed before that has the gradient cake and just 1 mini skein for your contrast color. All right, talking more about mini skeins, let me make sure to pull up some crochet. This is another fun one. It's called the Cyclic Cowl. And this one again has 1 background color, so that's a full skein. In this case, it's this dark charcoal. And it's got a set of mini skeins. So as you're crocheting, you're working through them, which keeps me interested. This particular one has a rainbow, which means it pretty much doesn't have a beginning and end, which is nice when you're wearing it. You don't have to worry too much about which one's showing. And I've got lots of different kits for this that have different rainbows, and a couple that have non-rainbow options if you aren't into it. But I've got, you know, if you like rainbows, I've got some that are bright and some that are muted and some that are kind of neon like this. So lots of different options. All right, welcome folks who are new and popping in. My name is Kira K Designs. I'm muting you if you didn't do that on your own, but if you have a question, feel free to put it into the chat, or if you don't mind your voice being recorded, it's fine with me if you want to unmute, and this can be a bit more of a conversation. But I'm also happy just to present.
I came a little late. Did you talk about the sweater you're wearing already?
I did, but I anticipated I would need to do it multiple times, so I'm happy to do that. It's a really fun sweater. This is called the Spoke. Yeah, it's called the Spoke cardigan, like the spokes on a wheel. It's knit seamlessly from the top down. I've got 14 different sizes, and there's an option for short sleeves as well as a 3/4 sleeves that's built into the pattern. It's also pretty easy to keep going if you want it to be a longer sleeve or a longer body. As written, it is right about waist length. Sorry, I am on my tippy-toes. There you go. Now you can see the bottom of it. And this particular one, I mixed a solid color with a self-striping yarn that's sort of created to look a lot like a hand spun yarn, which changes throughout the plies. This particular one is from Yarn Hero, and it was really fun to see that changing. And I opted to do a 4-row stripe with 2 rows of the contrast.
It's beautiful. Absolutely.
It's definitely a favorite of mine. All right, if anyone else has questions, feel free to let me know. I've got about another 9 minutes left. I'm not in a big rush. I do have a few more samples to show you. So one I definitely want to show you, because when it's the one that's on my mannequin, it gets a lot of attention too, is this guy. So I'm going to back up and hold this up for you. So this is called the Prismatic Honeycomb Shawl, and it is a modular knitting pattern where you start, this is the very first hexagon that you do, Each of the hexagons is done from the center inward. So you start on a circular needle and then transition to double points when you need to. Or of course, if you prefer magic loop or 2 circulars for your small circumferences, that would work just fine. And then as you build on the other hexagons, you add them as you go. So for the second one here, you would cast on 5 sides of the hexagon and then pick up along the original one here to join it as you go. And then you keep building them. And this is another one similar to one I mentioned earlier, where the pattern includes sort of a map or a diagram saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can tell where to put them as you go. And it's explained in words as well. And so each hexagon is a different color. This particular one, it's called Lustrous Gems. It's sort of a deep, moody rainbow. And then there's a full skein for the bottom edging, which is also done seamlessly. So for this, you pick up stitches and you're using increases and decreases, just very clearly explained, to mimic the shape that was already there at the bottom edge. So let me hold the whole thing up again. So this one's super fun. It's definitely one where people get worried about picking their own yarns. I have seen a fun scrappy version. I also showed it in a changing yarn where I just kept going with the same yarn and sort of the inside of the first hexagon matched the outside of the next one, which is kind of fun. But what I have for kits are sets where either the dyer or myself has come up with a set of yarn. So this is 10 different mini skeins. You would have your hexagons, 1 in each of them. And then at the end, you would do the variegated, slightly variegated color here would be the bottom edging. So for anyone who missed this, I know people are popping in and out. So forgive me if you're hanging out and I repeat myself. Kind of have to. But if you're a little nervous about working with colors, especially with so many like this, kits can be really nice because somebody else has put it together and said, hey, this will work really well for that design. And then you can look at the options and pick the one of those that you like best, whether it's, you know, just your colors you like knitting or crocheting with, or what you want in your wardrobe, or maybe you're making a gift for somebody else and thinking of their colors. But you don't have to go to the store and try to find 10 mini skeins that you like together and a full skein that works that are all in a similar yarn. You can do that if you enjoy that, by all means. My guess is you'll probably end up with, you know, 15 or 16 mini skeins because some of them might not quite work when you get to it. That's definitely been my experience. There could be some trial and error. So I like sometimes leaning in on the yarn dyers who deal with color all day, every day, and have them picking out some of the options. This particular one was put together by the yarn dyer, Wonderland Dye Works. And so it's always fun to see things that maybe aren't colors that I would have picked out. I would have been a little bit reticent to add in these sort of orangey tones, but they really kind of bring everything to life by having that little pop of something that's not just in the blue-green range that I would have gone for myself. So that one again is called the Prismatic Honeycomb Shawl. It's a really fun project. Another one where having the different colors keeps me from getting bored because I want to get to the next one and the next one and the next one. And then I find that I finish projects pretty quickly when I have that going on. All right, let me see what else I've got for you. Oh, I've got a little brioche. 2-color brioche is a really fun way to work with color because you end up with a reversible project. So this is called the Flip Side Hat. It's a pretty simple, basic 2-color brioche hat, but with a little twist in the form of some cables. If you've ever done brioche and ever done cables, a cable in brioche is really super duper easy, and it adds a lot of interest here. If you've never done brioche, I designed this pattern as an intro to brioche. So you start at the bottom, you're just doing your 2-color brioche in the round, which is the easiest way to do 2-color brioche. Working it flat is definitely more complicated. And then when you're up to the first cable, by then you kind of know what's going on with the brioche. The cable is just less than a minute of your time, not too tricky to do. And then you go back to your basic brioche. 1 more cable at the top. And then right near the end, when you're ready for it, you get to learn how to decrease in 2-color brioche. So these are paired decreases. Because it's a 2-stitch pattern, you really need to decrease 2 stitches at a time to make it work out. And then the fun part with this is totally reversible. And whenever I am wearing one of these or have it on display, whenever I say, and it's reversible, I just flip it inside out and put it back on my mannequin or back on my head the other way. So you end up kind of getting 2 hats in one because you end up with, a little bit more subtle purple hat in this case, or you can do the brighter green with the purple showing through. So that one's called the Flip Side Hat. Again, really nice introduction to brioche. And then I've got one more here. That is a fun one. This actually was inspired by the Dyer's yarn put up. So the way that they had the yarn package. I'm going to open up a package here. So this is Wonderland Dyeworks is the dyer, and she walked up to me at a show once and said, "Hey, do you have any patterns that would work for this?" And I said, "Yeah, well, probably this one or that one." And then she ended up just handing me a box of this yarn, and I took it home and played with it. So what it is basically 3 semi-solid colors. You can see they have a little highlight and shadow. They're not a flat solid. And then a variegated, which combines those 3 colors. And I tried a couple of things for that just to figure out how I could show it off really nicely. And then what I ended up designing was this cowl, which is a slip stitch pattern with those 3 colors. And really, even though you got 3 colors, you end up with 6 different sections. So here and here, you can see these are the same 2 colors, the light green and dark green. All I did was switch which one is in the front, but it ends up to your eye reading as overall a different color. And that keeps happening. So here we've got the lighter green and the purple, exact same 2 colors here. You just, and this is written in the pattern, of course, switch which one's in the front, basically skip a couple of rows in your pattern. And then you end up, this looks like it's totally different color because the way that they blend. And here again with these ones. So you can see the stripe sections are not even just by design. I like to have things a little bit less, that's what I want, a little less even. I'll just repeat myself. But you can totally do that on your own and change it. I do have the links written in the pattern because a lot of people do like to make it exactly as shown. So this is the cowl, and you'll remember that little yarn pack also had a variegated yarn. So I ended up with that, is doing a hat with a variegated yarn. So we have here the exact same stitch pattern, just in 1 yarn at a time. And so you end up blending the colors. And I love seeing how you get sort of a horizontal effect from the garter stitch in here with the colors going in sideways stripes. And then you also get a vertical effect with the slip stitch, and it changes where the colors land. So it doesn't look too busy, but it does just have a lot of interest. And I love this as a set because it is obviously goes together, but it's not too matchy-matchy because they aren't actually exactly the same. They just have the same colors. And then of course you can take, of the mini skeins that you used for the cowl, you can choose your favorite to do the band on the hat, whichever one you like best next to your skin tone or next to your hair color. It can be at the bottom there. So that's kind of a fun one. And again, it comes like this in a little box with the minis, and also both patterns for this one are in here. And in terms of patterns, when I have them in a kit, there is both a printed version. I do nice professionally printed thick paper, fold it up. So if you don't want to have a download anything, you don't have to. And there's also a little code to download the PDF. So if you do like to, either just save a digital copy or follow on your read along on your phone or your iPad, then you've got that option as well as the written version. All right, well, I went through my table of stuff. It is exactly the end of my time slot, and I know there's other vendors getting started. So thank you all for coming. This is going to be up on my YouTube channel, and there'll be a link through the Stitches events page for myself as a vendor, Kira K Designs. So if you missed anything, you can certainly come back to that. And then I will be teaching later today. I'm teaching a class on gauge and blocking, which has no homework and no materials. So if you want to jump into that, there's still time to. And then I'll also be back on Sunday doing another vendor slot. And for that one, I'll be talking about some tips and tricks for both knitting and crochet. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to hang out for a few more minutes. Thanks, Cynthia. Appreciate you spending some time with me today, everyone. I hope you all got lunch too. It's kind of in the lunchtime hour. All right, well, enjoy the rest of the day and enjoy the rest of the Stitches Expo at home. Maybe I'll see some of y'all at the morning coffees or in classes or at my presentation on Sunday.